Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight.
Hey, welcome to this week's episode of Freight 360, episode 281. Do us a favor, if you're a fan of the show, please like, share, comment on YouTube, share us with any of your colleagues. Nate is out today because I think the National Guard got called in for a strike. I'm actually reading his text. I know he said it last night. National Guard updated in New York for prison chaos, apparently. And a bunch of COs apparently went on strike. So he got activated late last night and is not going to be with us today. And we got a special guest with us, the infamous freight broker guy. And I know Nate was really looking forward to this episode, so I'm sure he is absolutely upset that he couldn't make this one. But this should be a really good, interesting show. I'm excited to dig in. Again, if you're a fan of the show, share us with your friends, like, comment, all that. If you got any questions, shoot those over. We'll answer those on the final mile. But I say we jump right into it and catch up a little bit. So you want to introduce yourself, freight broker guy, in regards to how you want to introduce yourself? Because I know we're going to basically, I guess, disguise, or you're still going to remain anonymous, but how do you want us to address you and how do you want to be introduced?
Yeah, Steven and Nate in absentia. Thanks for having me, man. This is pretty cool. You can call me whatever you like. Just don't call me late for dinner. But I've been a fan of the show, the podcast. I usually check out the podcast while I'm driving to and from, and you guys put out great content. And I think you do a great service for the industry on kind of both sides of the ball, and provide a lot of great content and educational products for people who are curious, so they can figure out for themselves if it's something they want to try out, or to improve their skills they already have.
Appreciate it. Thanks for the feedback. And I'm going to let Steven give some context to who you are for people that aren't familiar. When he sent your stuff over to me, I am not on social very often. Also have a little kid, so there's just not that much time. But I literally was laughing for like a good 45 minutes. It's just a string of posts that he sent over. And my wife came over, she's like, "What are you laughing at?" And I was just showing her some of the responses and comments that you had on there, which I thought were absolutely hysterical. But I know Steven's probably a better fit to be able to add some context to some of the conversations and some of the things, so some of our listeners can check you out if they haven't already.
Yeah. So we found FreightBrokerGuy on
good. Whenever you get that set
X,
up,
formerly known as Twitter, and he's very active in that space, talking to the
Mike. Perfect. Very nice to meet you.
Getting into the conversation on the industry. Hold on one second.
I would say specifically too, related to a lot of the, call it, contentious conversations between brokers and carriers related to like margin transparency, were definitely a few hot button issues that I saw some comments on. What were some of the others, Steven?
Transparency, any of the stuff. It's the account that you run on X is just, it's a gold mine.
Yeah.
And it's very entertaining. And I know it might have been a year ago now, Dooner had reached out to you and you were going to go on his show to talk about your niche, which is horses, which is kind of how we got the conversation started in the beginning. So I'm glad to see that you made it on here. And I think you had some technical issues with Dooner and weren't able to make it. So yeah, it'll be nice to finally put a dragon face to a freight broker guy for all the dragon
to a handle
out there.
I mean, as you can see, I'm a stalwart supporter of transparency from my get up here today. I couldn't figure out the audio. I'm sure it's absolutely my fault, but appreciate the feedback. Likewise, Ben. If I can, I'm not always being. I'm a pretty sarcastic person. You got to have some levity somewhere. if I feel
Agreed.
like I'm going to throw my monitor out the window, maybe I just get on my phone and you know, yell at the TNOOA and then get back to it.
I mean, you got to have some outlet, right, to be able to let some of the stress go. For sure, a stressful industry, and really going to be excited because I think a lot of people are going to be shocked. And I'm going to let you share what you want to regarding your background. I think there are some really interesting things about your career trajectory that are worth sharing if you feel like doing so. I found it incredibly fascinating how you ended up in the industry and the niche we're going to dig into today, which, again, as Stephen pointed out, is horses. Before we dig in, just a little bit on news, and we covered the Super Bowl last week. There was an XPO non-compete lawsuit, and I'm going to just read the highlights because I know you mentioned you saw the headlines, but this was out of Freight Caviar that apparently XPO's latest lawsuit is putting them back in the spotlight. The LTL giant is suing two former employees that allegedly broke their contracts by jumping ship to a competitor. And the two people cited were Tess Farnan and Mark Shatman. I guess that's how you pronounce it. They had left the company in 2024, joined Central Transport. XPO is now suing them, claiming they violated their 11-page confidential information protection agreement, which bars them from competing against XPO or soliciting its customers for 6 months. Now, here's what I thought was interesting. XPO is suing them in North Carolina, even though both worked in Kansas City area. And why? Possibly because North Carolina's non-compete laws favor enforcement. The lawsuit defines the restricted area as basically the entire United States. Why is that? Because their network XPO's network covers 99% of US zip codes, including a 100-mile radius from Kansas City, 50 miles from any other XPO office, and every state or province where XPO has customers. Now, if an employee is terminated without cause, XPO will pay them for 6 months to stay out of the industry, but if they leave or quit, no pay, just a non-compete ban. Now, here's the thing I found fascinating. How much did XPO lose? According to XPO, the impact was immediate. But here's the numbers. A $9,000 account in June 2024 shrank to $900 by November, and a $19,000 account dropped to $1,000 over that same period, right? So Farnan allegedly took one account from $11,000 to $1,000 in 2 months, and another disappeared. XPO sent letters demanding compliance, but neither former employee responded, which to me doesn't seem like a huge dollar amount. It seems more like the principal. And the other thing I wanted to add was that the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, has moved to ban non-competes nationwide. However, they've been facing a lot of lawsuits and states are getting involved in their own way. But one of the largest challenges, and this is interesting because this is where a lot of freight brokers are headquartered, is in Ohio. And a bill was introduced earlier this month, SB number 11, which would ban non-competes entirely and even allow employees to sue their employers to void them. If passed, the law would, 1, prohibit employers from enforcing non-compete clauses, 2, allow workers to sue for damages, attorney fees, and even punitive damages up to $5,000, and give the Ohio Attorney General the authority to take legal action against companies that try to enforce them. That would make Ohio the 5th state to ban non-competes, following California, Minnesota, North Dakota, and Oklahoma. And I would really like to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so my blanket response to non-competes is that, generally speaking, they're for cowards, written by attorneys who are not involved in the business. So,
Agreed.
with limited exception. So if your employment is contingent upon and requires some sort of advanced degree, a law degree, medical degree, or your employment status is contingent on some sort of visa from USCIS. But other than that, if you're not a managerial level or VP level decision maker on the actual business that affects the day-to-day operations, I think it is something that it's good to hear that the state of Ohio and those other 7 you listed have taken real steps to at least maybe tamp down the fervor, the litigiousness from not just freight brokers, but Jimmy John's. Yeah, Jimmy John's took a couple of guys, sandwich artists. What the fuck is that? Going to opening up their own deli. It's like, I can make a sandwich in my house. I can book a load from my car. There is nothing unique about, and there's often a proprietary element. There's some sort of element of proprietary defense or support to their suit. But I mean, one of the great sponsors of this show offers a free TMS for at least access to TMS tools for a period of time. If any Tom, Dick, and Harry can access essentially at least the bare bones tools that I can use as a full blown broker, and you, Ben, and Steven and Nate. I'm not sure what the non-compete does, except for, of course, protectionist posturing that keeps talent out of the industry, which is bad for the industry.
Agreed. Yeah. Now, the argument that I've seen made in the countersuits against this, and I'll steel man that side, which is you have industries and different types of companies that work in industries, right, where intellectual property and proprietary methods of doing business are a competitive advantage, right? So, I mean, just to point out one that I think probably is applicable, like if you are in like research and development, maybe in like pharmaceuticals, or you've come up with a chemistry process to develop some type of product, coating, medicine, whatever, that is very proprietary, that took, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to develop, and that person leaves and takes that information and then passes that information to another company, that to me seems like justifiable. The part on the other side of that I don't understand is like, why can't that agreement narrow the scope to the information without the ability to work in another company, right? Because if you protect the information and you're legally not allowed to share it, then you would be in breach of it. I feel like where it's too broad is saying that you can't work in a field because you worked at a company that was somehow utilizing some proprietary information, right? Have you ever seen any cases where agreements are written narrowly scoped in that way that allow somebody to keep working even in a field where the information is highly guarded and protected?
No, not in the context of what we're talking about. And really, I think just, in 2025, the idea that your non-compete could be enforceable simply because the internet exists is silly.
Agreed.
However, I agree. If you're using company resources to develop a tool or product or unique, first to market service, maybe not so much on the service side, but if you are utilizing company property and resources to develop something that you can take with you, yeah, it's fair enough. But I don't think that's what's happening here.
So here's the question, right? And I'll give both points of view, right? The point of view I've heard from large freight brokerage companies, right, is they will train thousands of people a year, of which the success rate is a low percentage. So they're training employees on their dime, at which then leave and then go work at other companies. Now, the reason they say they need to protect against that is like, hey, we're training all these people on our dime and they're going to go compete with us. The counter argument that I always believed was, well, then don't let them go. If they're that valuable and you chose to let them go, you made that decision first, right? And then the other argument I've heard is that, we're in somewhat of a commodity space, like you said. Like if you have the same tools as a large company and you can access the market through DAT, through a free, TMS, and you can get your bond, there's not really a barrier to entry. I think the real motivation behind it is more because I think these companies realize when you have a customer as a freight broker, that shipper has loyalty to that human being that understands their supply chain, their needs, their nuances in a way that they become an extension of that shipper, as opposed to the value being provided by the larger organizations. And the companies need to protect that because they know if that person leaves, the customer is going to be loyal to that individual broker, not the larger entity, which I think is more likely the real reason. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I entirely agree. So there's while you were laying that out, three things specifically came to mind. So I do know there has been a court case. I think it was in the late thousands, where some sort of sports training school sued a former instructor because they took their, what they claim to be the proprietary athletic training program, and the courts ruled in favor of the respondent. So the guy who left, the coach that got sued, saying, you cannot patent and protect methods that could have been independently developed by anyone else with this specific professional experience. So that's significant.
Oh,
and someone,
that was the thing I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask you specifically because that's the case that is made in some of these, is that the companies are like, well, we've trained them to be able to go and source carriers, have conversations differently, negotiate more effectively. And that seems like that precedent was set some 20 some years ago.
Right. Yeah. And to stay in that vein, just to kind of hammer this nail down. The company has a responsibility to train new people, and it's in their best interest, of course. And the success rate in an individual has less to do, in my opinion, well, maybe I'm wrong here, but it has less to do with the quality of training.
Have you fallen victim to double brokering, cargo theft, or identity theft? QuickScope stands out as the only load-level fraud protection tool available today. Unlike any other solution on the market, QuickScope is deployed post-agreement between shippers or brokers and carriers. Shippers can rest assured that their cargo remains secure. Brokers can confidently confirm the identity of the individuals on site for pickup, and carriers can trust that they'll receive timely payment. Start your free trial with QuickScope today by visiting them online at quickscope.com. That's QUIKSKOPE.com. Blue Book Services is the resource you need if you're transporting fresh produce or lumber. Their online databases contain thousands of companies throughout the produce and lumber industry supply chains. You can easily search their databases to generate new sales leads. Blue Book's credit ratings help you avoid companies with high credit risk, and their team can help resolve disputed loads. To learn more, go to producebluebook.com or lumberbluebook.com and click Join today.
Okay, there we go. It has less to do with the training provided by an individual company and more to do with the trainee's ability to apply the training. So
I agree.
That is to say, someone who, I didn't know anything about the freight market. I started listening to the Freight 360 a long time ago, and I was like, damn, that's exactly what we did over here.
And here's the
that's
question
pretty
too.
Yeah.
If that was not the case, if the training was so proprietary and so much different or such a competitive advantage that you needed to protect it, then why is the success rate basically the same across the entire industry? It's not like one company hires 100 people, 90 of which are successful, and everyone else is hiring 100 and 10 are successful. Like, the numbers pretty much play out equally wherever you are, which to me speaks to the likelihood of the individual being the differentiator, their willingness to learn, their hunger to compete, whether they're aggressive or driven enough, however you want to define that. It's usually not intelligence. There's a quote, Calvin Coolidge quote on that same topic. And I heard it recently, but I didn't want to cut you off, but I really do believe it's almost objectively played out.
Yeah, and so to be fair, I guess, as much as I'm willing to be on this topic, the importance of good management cannot be overstated. I've had good managers and shit managers in this industry and other totally unrelated industries and I have managed teams and people, and I think that there could be a strong argument for non-compete enforcement at the management level because of the importance of those managers. And managers, of course, do have some decision-making
Yes.
authority. As you climb the rungs, you accrue more authority. But yeah, I mean,
I,
the basics of learning
yeah.
the industry are damn near the same at any brokerage that you work for, because we all have to do the same shit. You got to vet the carrier pretty much the same way. You bypass the gatekeeper pretty much the same way. You deal with claims you deal with claims exactly the same way, or it won't get dealt with. I
Yep.
mean, it's like, it doesn't matter if I sit in this chair or that chair. It's, yeah, the customer. So, the second specific thing, everyone in our company, well, of a certain experience, knows exactly how to broker the freight that they broker. But if there's an issue with some sort of niche, or there's a customer or commodity
Yes.
specific issue, and any other person answers the phone during that situation, they have
It's a
no idea how to
differentiator.
help.
Correct.
Yeah,
There are differentiators. There are skills, there are performance differences on individual training and management.
yeah,
I mean, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of like, I think there are other issues in our industry where most managers are just the top performers that make it to management without looking
yeah,
at their different skill sets. And I found that
right.
quote, right? Because I feel like this is like kind of spot on. It was from Calvin Coolidge, and it's nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent, right?
Right.
And the slogan press on has solved and always will solve the problems of the human race, right? And like to me, that really does define almost every top performer in any industry and almost any profession where you are performance based compensation. Like the ability to keep doing a hard thing even when you don't feel like it, to me, is the single biggest determination of whether or not you're going to get where you want to go.
Yeah, yeah, and the education, there's whatever, the overeducated proverb or whatever. Um, yeah, there's plenty of smart people who come through the door and they overanalyze things when they just need to get back on the phone. Like
That was my
how many
biggest issue.
conversations? Yeah, how
For
many?
sure.
You've only made 60 calls today, and you have no customers, no clients, you have no trucks on the road. Like, I think I know what your problem is.
My biggest issue when I first started, and my background was as an analyst, right? So, like, I'm trained and looking for things, trying to do this, looking through numbers and the context of business situations. So, when I got into the industry, my first 6 weeks where I was genuinely trying to solve the problem of really, if I get to the root of it and I'm honest, the fear of picking up the phone and calling and cold calling. I had done it tens of thousands of times before that, but that
Yeah,
is still there in a new industry when you haven't had the conversations yet. So I was spending time trying to find the perfect lead, the perfect industry, the perfect niche, to find the right company with the right research to be able to like thread that needle to basically get to success without overcoming the uncomfortable part of picking up the phone, right? And my
yeah,
manager early on went, I'll never forget this. He goes, do you trust me? And I went, his name was Jason. I go, yeah. He goes, will you just listen to me and do what I ask or what I'm suggesting you do? Give me 6 weeks. And I go, what should I do? And he goes, just sit down in front of the prospecting screen, pick a category, make 100 to 120 calls a day. Do that for 6 weeks and let's talk again. 6 weeks
yeah,
later, I had a customer that was doing like 10K a week. And it wasn't that I found the perfect one. It was just, to your point, put enough effort in, practiced enough having the conversations, screwing up, saying, I'm sure, dumb shit, being embarrassed at times, hanging up the phone, and trying over and over until I got better at it to be able to work through it. And it was the single most important piece of advice I probably had that actually determined whether or not I was going to stay in this industry or leave and go somewhere else.
right. Well, and this, just like with a lot of other things, it is about the reps, but they have to be good reps.
Yeah.
there's, we have all, I'm sure, seen people fudging their call numbers because they say, well, they said I got to make 100 calls today so I don't get fired. So I'm going to call this number I know that won't answer 3 times.
Call the
You know,
800 numbers. Boom,
yeah,
boom, boom. Sit on
yeah,
call waiting, or you're on a call queue because your call time's going to go up while you're pressing 1, 3,
right. Yeah,
2
I
for
gotta,
9 minutes.
I gotta have 28 minutes of talk time today. I'm gonna call this Walmart distribution center. That'll get,
Yep.
I'm halfway
I'll
there
be on
now.
hold for a good 9, 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'm gonna go heat my lunch up while I just set my handset down. But it, it, you've probably heard stories. Kobe would wake up at like 4 o'clock and he wouldn't shoot 100 free throws before practice. He made himself make 100 free throws. So
Yep.
if
Feedback
you're
loop.
just
You've got to be
if you're
learning
just
from your
throwing
mistakes.
yeah if you're just throwing the ball at the backboard 100 times, you can call that a free throw, but it's not a free throw.
In freight, time is money, and efficiency is key. That's where Levity comes in. Imagine automating your email operations to do more with less effort. Levity connects directly to your inboxes, extracting vital information from emails and attachments in real time. It seamlessly integrates with your TMS, empowering you to quote faster, build loads more efficiently, and book more freight in less time. Whether it's incoming emails from shippers or carriers, Levity's got you covered. It understands any language, any format, and even interprets non-standard formatting. Visit levity.ai today to sign up and get started.
Tired of struggling to find accurate rates and the right carriers for your freight? With DAT1, you can access more than 500 million posted loads and trucks every year. That's 3 times more capacity than any other load board. Plus, their integrated freight management system makes it easy to cover loads 24/7. They have the most trusted network of carriers, brokers, and shippers in the country. You'll get real-time rates on every lane so you know exactly how much a shipment will cost before you commit to it. Plus, you get instant access to top bids from qualified carriers around the country. Get 10% off your first year of DAT1 when you visit the link in the show notes. I think that's a
Yeah.
really
So,
important thing
so
is
when
I've
I'm
had folks,
yeah
to your point, I wanted to hit on that for a minute because we're going to talk about prospecting in your niche in a minute. But like the one thing that I try to get people new to understand is it's like, it sounds so cheesy or cliche, right? But like why you learn how to ride a bike by doing it is because when you don't do it right, you fall and it hurts. So you
yeah
learn to avoid the thing that hurts. But if you're making phone calls and you're not present and you're not paying attention and really listening to whether or not you got farther, you had a better call, did you connect a little better, and then trying to improve based on that feedback, to your point, like you could just call 100 people and not pay attention, you're going to do the same thing tomorrow and not have improved at all.
hmm yeah. So when I'm bringing on a new intern or a new assistant or whatever, um, if it's someone who broke, the sales side didn't work out and they're getting put on mine or another senior broker's board, whatever. They know how to use the tools, but they, for whatever reason, have been unsuccessful at securing their own customers. That's fine, because there's different skill sets
Different
that
personalities, right? Some
that
people
are
like it,
needed.
some people don't.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. And if you're good at talking to trucks, but you can't ever ask a prospect for the load, well, I mean, maybe you should just talk to trucks. Um,
Yep.
and when I'm involved in training anybody that's new or someone asks me a question, like, hey, I'm moving this thing out of this part of the country for the first time. Um, I'm trying to. I always tell folks, you're going to hear categories of the same objections over and over. You need to write them down because if you hear the same
And
objection
why do you
over
write
and
them
over,
down? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, well, I have them physically write them down because
Yep.
there's a lot of data that shows if you create the letters with your body, you will remember the information better. But
Yep.
if you're hearing the same objections over and over, guess what? The overcoming objection part is probably similar as well. So
Yes.
if you'll never have 100 conversations prospecting a day, that'd be incredible. But let's say you have 10. And there's a rule in finance that was the 10-3-1 rule. I don't know if you all have heard about that for prospecting, but if you have 10 conversations and 7 of the objections was, I already worked with, Sweet Sally over at, Scotland Freight Brokerage. It's like, okay, well, you've heard that 7 times out of the 10 conversations today. What else did they say? What did you say? You didn't say anything? Well, I mean, that's all right. Call them next week. They won't remember you called. But let's think about that objection that you seem to be hearing a lot more than the others. And the chances are, if you can find out more information, maybe that's not true. Maybe it is true, and Sweet Sally's not doing a good job. Or Sweet Sally has late trucks all the time, but she has good rates. Whatever. What are they actually saying no to?
Getting to that point. And I went through this with a coach and client recently, right? We pulled a bunch of calls and they said, everybody tells me, basically kind of blows me off, says they're not onboarding anybody. It's like, to your point, it is the 7 of 10, right? We don't have any need. We don't have anything, right? And I'm like, and I always start with, because someone taught me this, was one of my first sales coaches in my 20s. He goes, whatever you're hearing is always a reflection of what you're saying. So if you're hearing the same thing over and over again, go back in your calls and listen to what you say that precedes that objection, because usually you're initiating it in some way, whether you realize it or not, right? So we go back and listen to the calls, and every single call is starting the same way. Hey, I wanted to see how you guys onboard your vendors and see what it takes to get set up as a broker. And I'm like, pause. And I'm like, so you start every call with the same thing. Well, yeah. Okay. If somebody called you, I said, well, first let me ask you, is that something that benefits you, or the person that you just called interrupted their day, took them away from what they were doing, and then asked for something you need or something that would help them? And they're like, well, I don't know. I'm like, well, think about it. Does that benefit you or does that help them? Well, I guess it would benefit me. I'm like, okay, well, if somebody called you out of the blue and said, hey, do you want to buy new internet service? Who do you use for your internet service? How do I get you to buy internet service from me? Would you want to talk further with them, or would you want to make them go away? Like, well, I'd probably want to make them go away. I'm like, okay, well, if you start with something different, you will get a different response. How about trying to find something that's valuable to them when you call? Whatever it is, whether it's you literally do have trucks that deliver there 2 days or 3 days a week with another customer, and you thought it might be a fit if those lanes matched up with your carriers. Maybe it's that you have experience in their niche and you saw something interesting and you wanted their thoughts on it. Maybe you work with their customer and you thought it was worth a conversation because you've done well with them and they referred you over. Whatever it is, get to something that they care about if you expect them to care enough to talk to you when they're busy doing other things, right? Like, you're probably creating that 70% of objections in one way or another, right?
Yeah. And so I like this guy, Patrick Bet-David. He's in the insurance industry, and he's kind of, he's grown into probably more than that. He gets into stuff that's not industry related. But I remember he said something one time where if you can seek out a problem for somebody that they don't even really like to talk about, and then solve it for them, you will be allowed, in their mind, subconsciously, to ask for something. So there's a story about, some guy's son was in prison. He was in another state. And this guy, I don't remember what he's trying to sell, but he was like, well, how often do you go see him? He's like, I don't get up there very much. And this guy found out his address, was like, hey, I talked to your dad. I understand you're going through a hard time right now, but, you don't know me, I don't know you, but I can tell by the way your dad talked about you. He really cares for you, and he's excited for you to, learn your lesson and to come back home. And he said he saw that guy at a hotel in New York like a year later, and he said, hey, I didn't tell you could write my son a letter. It's like, yeah, fair enough. I didn't ask either, but the way you were talking about your son made an impression on me, and I thought that he should hear that. And this guy was like, come with me. He thought he was going to kick his ass. And he's like, hey, listen. So I was having a hard time getting over my mental block, this river of resistance I was experiencing because I'm ashamed that my son is in prison. And I wanted to tell him those things that you said in your letter, and that gave me the balls to,
it gives me chills.
Yeah. And he was like, you know what? What was that thing you called me about? Stop by, give me a call next Tuesday at 2 or whatever. Let's get back to that because it sounds like you actually give a shit.
there's a cliche saying too, and I learned in sales coach, so like nobody cares what you have to say until they understand or believe that you care, right?
Yeah.
Like you have
Yeah.
to establish, and it's not even trust, that that person believes you actually care about the thing you're talking about or helping them before they're going to care about your solution, right? And however you get
Yeah.
there, I mean, that is a fantastic, I would say probably extreme example, not something you'd be able to do every day, but it does highlight the fact that if you do just go a little beyond what your competitors are doing to show that you either know something, care, or want to help, and it is
Yeah.
genuine and you're vulnerable, that is what people look for in just every human relationship, every friend, every colleague, people they do business with. People want to do business with people that they trust. They don't want to
Yeah.
constantly have to double check. They want to be able to go about their day and know that in our scenario, like their freight is taken care of. Or in yours, and I think this is a good segue, their horses, right? So tell us a little bit about how you got into the niche, and let's segue right into that, because I think this is a really good way to get into that topic.
Yeah, and I'll set it up by saying, though I didn't know anything about freight, I knew a lot about the people involved in the industry that I was interested before I even had this opportunity. So, the equine industry, broadly speaking, and then definitely in the racehorse world, is so deeply ensconced and entrenched in tradition and relationships. Like it's incredible. There is absolutely loyalty that can be cultivated, and once you have it, it's harder to lose from a relationship perspective. That being said, there's millions of dollars on the line for your customer shipper, as you could say.
Well,
So
let's go through the basics real quick before you even
yeah,
go that far. I think just kind of lay out for the audience, like from a high level, like what does the industry look like? How and what is done, just for people that aren't familiar with how and what even happens in the
sure.
horse industry.
Yeah. The athlete move. So these racehorses, they call them equine athletes. So these athletes make a lot more movements across the globe, really, than most people realize. So, when you're in racing season, you can turn on the TV and watch, the Kentucky Derby run at Churchill Downs. But when they're not racing, they're moving, between, Florida or Kentucky or New York to Australia for breeding, or they're coming from a sale in Saudi Arabia, and uh, the, all of these horses have a lot of stuff. If you've got a several $1 million athlete on a football team, that team feeds those athletes when they're in spring training because they want to make sure they're getting what they think they need to be able to perform at a high level. So it's not just the horse; it's the particular feed. It's a follow vehicle that has a veterinarian in it, and maybe even a trainer's assistant who has all the legal documents. And anytime you cross a state line with a racehorse, if that state has a racing commission, you've got to pay fees, and there's a duty to inform that there's this horse in your borders, because if you're like sneaking into Arkansas to breed your horse, they're gonna send your ass to jail. So from just kind of a general information standpoint, there's a lot.
Lots of hoops to jump through, lots of
Yeah,
things, lots of boxes to check, lots of regulations to follow, and for good reason.
yeah,
Like you said, I mean, like the thing that I feel like is interesting, and the little bit that I know and that I've followed or read about it, is that like yeah, they're incredibly expensive in some aspects, right? But also
yeah,
like the ability to determine which horse is worth more than the other is a very specialized skill honed over very many years, in lots of cases decades, right? To be able to tell the difference within a breed, which ones are going to be able to perform the best, breed the best, make the most money, like. And to the other point is like, to the layman, someone not in that, like a horse kind of looks like a horse, I think, to most people, right? But
yeah,
when you're in the industry, like you said, like you bring in a horse that's worth $10-20 million. Like there was a huge case where the cartel there was a giant case where they got busted because they were literally laundering money into one of the guys that, and I can't remember which part of horse racing, I think it was quarter racing or something, but basically they were laundering tens of millions of dollars because they were sneaking horses in places that they didn't or weren't supposed to be, breeding them with other horses, and they were winning races, and no one knew how this no-name person was all of a sudden literally at the top of their field, and they found out like it was basically violating all these regulations and laws that like you're kind of outlining that exist for these very reasons.
Yeah. And so if you're doing it the right way, which it behooves you to, because the financial and legal implications are massive. But if you do something wrong on purpose in horse racing, you will absolutely be in the newspaper for it. So you don't want that's if your truckload of raspberries flips over, your uncle's never going to hear about it. But
yeah, it's a good point.
But the lead time is an asset, because like when the sales are, when the races are, but the amount of planning between the various commissions and the USDA quarantine rules if they're coming back from Australia from breeding or whatever, it's just a massive pain in the ass. So you can really only handle something like that if you decided to niche down and learn the details,
so how did
and then you can go. Yeah.
How did you start?
So I was a former congressional staffer, and my boss was a member of the Congressional Horse Caucus. And prior to that, I didn't have much interest in horse racing, to be honest. But just through the work of the day, I was reading bills and marking up legislation drafts, and when you do that, you have to meet with other human beings involved in the industry, so various stakeholders, other congressional staffers who've been there longer than you from another state, probably with a different political perspective, but they care about this issue you're working on. So I was kind of I accidentally got involved in the industry because of who my boss was. So that's how I started to just meet. I didn't know at the time. I started to meet the people who became important and vital to what I'm doing now, years ago.
Yep.
And, I started training in freight and doing what everyone else does. And I was like, you know what? These horses, they don't walk from New York to Kentucky to California. And then, everything around you, you touch, use, smell, eat, whatever, look at, comes on some sort of van, some sort of trailer. I'm like, man, so do horses. Huh. Let me see if I can crack this nut. So.
And I think that's something that Nate and I talk about this a lot, is people always say, like, what should I prospect first? And we always kind of give the advice that, like, we think a great place to start is something you have experience in and know about. And the great part about our industry is, if it is any physical good, right, even if it's a service, there's probably a physical good related to it where you probably understand the inner workings of how those things function, and can probably have a very good conversation and establish some relationships with less, I don't want to say less effort, but like less than learning something. If I had to jump into horses, like it would take me weeks and months to be able to get up to speed, even understand some of that. And guess what? If that's something you want to do, to your point earlier, the internet, ChatGPT, like you can go and get this knowledge if you want to take the time to learn about something you really want to get into. But let's say even like if we're a bartender, right? Yeah. Like you probably really understand the food and beverage industry. If you are a waiter, you probably really do understand where that food comes into the kitchen, who the suppliers are, where your chefs buy the food from, what makes up that menu. Again, like doesn't mean you need to ship food, but there are very close things in industries that you probably are really comfortable talking about already. That is just a little bit of a segue that gets you into that to where you can learn those nuances, right? So as you kind of decided to dip your toe into it, like tell us a little bit on some of the stuff that, you want to share about like actually moving these things and what you're kind of comfortable sharing with everybody. Things, animals, horses, right?
Yeah. So It is nice, in freight. There's a lot of hot load 911, please help stuff, but that really doesn't happen in any racing industry. Whether it's
Pretty
auto car
scheduled.
racing
Kind of know
or
where they're
horses.
going
Yeah, it's like
long
they
before.
announced the date of this race. The Kentucky Derby is the first Saturday in May, and it has been for 151 years. So we know when that movement has to be made. So highly regimented industries. That's kind of good. I would equate that to if you're working with government freight. There's usually not like a, hey, this truck didn't show up, please help. So that's an advantage, but just I had the idea, and I'd become close friends with some, maybe not horse owners, but at least like assistant trainers, things like that. Started having that conversation. It's like, well, how do you get these? How do you get these animals around? What do you do? Like, do you guys, get the Sally van and take it? And he's like, well, it depends. And I was like, well, what does it depend on? So I thought I already knew a lot. And then he's like, well, what do you mean it depends? Why would you take your own truck from, Ocala to Orlando or Ocala to Saratoga, but you won't drive your own horse across the street to the vet? And he was like, oh, hell no, we would never do that because this, and this. I was like, well, who does then? Yeah. So I was like, well, why not? And a lot of it is depending on how close, if like you've got a 2-year-old or if you're going to a yearling sale soon, you want those movements to be conducted by a contractor, because you want though the industry relies a lot on tradition and relationships, there's also a lot of fraud.
Yep.
So you want to be able to document through somebody else that yes,
arm's
this
length
horse
transaction.
went to this. Yeah, it's like yes, this horse went to this breeding facility at this time, and if you don't believe me, you can call Joe. It's like, okay.
And again, I could see like why that would matter. It's like, hey, if you're going to buy a certain stock or breed, you want to know how many of them are out there, I guess. Probably depends on the value, supply and demand. If the horse breeds more, I'm guessing there's different rates. I mean, anything that there's more of tends to change the price. So having some paper trail is able to verify what and how and when these things happen, I guess.
Yeah. And there's also, when you're crossing a state line, those issues can become different. But some owners, if you're not a massive, well-known like household racing name, you probably want to shift the liability to somebody else. You may have your own. It's like one of those. If you're calling anybody and they say, "Well, we have our own trucks," it's like, yeah, well, that's why I'm calling. Are you a growing company or are you shrinking? Because if you've got 4 trucks and you need 7, what the hell you do with the 3? So if someone has a good horse, but they would prefer that, God forbid something happens, it becomes someone else's fault. That's a good business decision.
Yeah. I mean, it's mitigating the risk. You're able to mitigate the responsibility. You've got a paper trail.
Yeah.
There's insurance involved. Like all of those things kind of make sense.
Yeah.
What would you...
And from just an industry experience perspective, I'm learning more every day. Hopefully, usually not the hard way, but if someone there are new people who become interested on the ownership side of racing all the time. They buy into a syndicate, whatever. That's another issue. If you got 17 owners, they all want to, they all want the same information, all this stuff. So, the farm, the stable would prefer that they just talk to me and I can communicate with their so it's like you've got one customer, but there's 17 people you got to answer to. So that can be a pain in the ass for a trainer who's trying to train the horse instead of, making sure, the hallway feed got from this place to this place. Like, yes, the quarantine paperwork is prepared for this racetrack, whatever. It's, they just want to train the horse.
And I think that's a really good example, right? And I think for everyone out there listening, right, like this is not specific to horse industry, right? Like what you just described and what I'm hearing you say, right, is like there are other aspects of value you are providing to the customers, to that industry, beyond just picking up stuff or an animal and going from A to B or A to B to C, right? It is making sure the
Right.
paperwork's involved. It's communicating with other people that maybe aren't your customer as an additional service to your customer. Hey, I'm sure
Right.
there's instances where they're emailing and saying, hey, can you get the paperwork over to these folks? And you've got it organized and you can get it to them, right? There's scenarios that, like in other niches, this happens all the time. Anytime you're moving something from the United States to another country and you're using a customs broker, just the fact that that broker is dealing with the customs broker and the shipper doesn't have to, making sure the paperwork's done, making sure all those things happen without them taking those extra few steps is a service and is a value add, not just moving from A to B. Anytime you're managing a container pool or even a trailer pool and organizing who's picking up which loads and which day takes that burden off of your customer. Like the one example that I remember and like what I've done is like we had literally ships full of steel. It looked like rebar, like large poles of steel coming in from Brazil into New Orleans. We shipped them all the way up to the different steel mills and the delivery places. But the thing we did that no one else was either willing to do or thought to ask was they all came in bulk and they all had different POs. So the stevedores that loaded them on the trucks weren't organizing and keeping track of which went on where. So we just created spreadsheets and made sure that when anyone else, the customers or any third party sent, hey, which went there on which day, who got what, we had all that, provided that paperwork. And yeah, that's not just moving it from, A to B. It was also organizing the information and then being willing to communicate with whoever our customer asked. Hey, can you send these documents over there? Hey, I sent them, but they didn't get them. They want them from you. Again, it's more work. And in some cases, like you can charge more margin, but that margin isn't what you're taking away from a trucking company. It is an additional service you are providing to your customers and your customers' customers that might not even be involved in that shipment, right? But those are the nuances that you only learn, or the things that someone needs, to your earlier point, by asking questions, right? It depends. Depends on what? What else do you have to do? Are there any other things you've got to do related to these shipments? Is there anything that's a pain in the ass that I can maybe take off your plate because I've got the information anyway? I'm more than happy to have my team get this information to who you need. Now, you don't got to send 15 emails about every load to everybody else involved in this, every third party. Like we have tanker loads. I was looking at one last week. There are 6 intermediaries involved in this shipment. Like one company sold it to another company, sold to another company 6 times. It still picked up from the same place and went to the same place, but there were that many transactions in the middle and everybody needed a paper trail, needed food grade certifications and all these things. And like, again, that doesn't mean you're charging more money to move the thing. It's you're pricing the time and the service you provide above and beyond just getting it from A to B, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And therein lies the rub that I have, and it sounds like you do, with the transparency issue. Because
Yes.
Also, what a misnomer! Like transparency for what?
Yeah.
So
You have no idea what we're doing on this load or what the situation
it's
is.
like I for certain commodities, I damn near work with the same like 5 carriers every time. And they don't say shit about transparency because they know
they don't want to do what you're doing.
Yeah, so it's like if you can just kind of juxtapose a rate to a different commodity, which is silly, but just for example of this topic, it's like, all right, Mr. Carrier, me and 4 other people have been working on this specific load for 7 weeks.
One load.
Yeah,
Right.
one load. And you think because this customer is going to pay us $12,000, I should pay you $11,000? Like, kiss my ass. And also, when you deliver this load, I'm going to have to still work on this load for another 4 days. So,
Yes.
Thanks for getting it to A to B safely, but, kiss my ass.
Well, and again, like, I don't think and I don't even think I look at it as like, it's not the negative to the carrier, right? Like, pay a fair rate for the thing you're doing.
Conversation, actually.
Correct.
It's usually a Twitter thing.
Exactly. But I think it's a really good point, right? Because, like, again, I'll just go to that example, right? I worked on each one of those shipments for probably 6 to 8 weeks before the boat arrived, right? Organizing
Yeah.
it, going through POs, Excel sheets, figuring out which is going where, how it was loaded on the boat. I'm paying somebody to literally do this with me, organize it with me, right? And then once it ships, right? After that, to your point, this also happened around 2017 when the tariffs went into place, and we had to divert shipments
Oh yeah.
into storage, keep track of where they went, then
Yeah,
pick
or
them up
start all
again,
over.
then get them there,
Yeah.
start all over again, right? And then keep track of which invoices attached to which, who's paying for what, who is responsible for this portion, who is this. We didn't get paid for like 9 months until it all played out. And it's like, okay, well, like, is that
Yeah.
really the same thing as picking it up and getting it to the warehouse and then maybe picking it up? Like,
Right.
there are a lot of things, and again, this is not every shipment, and I wouldn't say this is common in everything that is moved in our industry, but there are so many variables that just go unnoticed that nobody talks about, and everyone goes, well, I just want to see we're getting paid. And it's like, okay, well, can we line item the things that are happening above and beyond? Somebody handed me a load and I handed it to somebody else, right? Just no one
Yeah.
wants to talk about
Yeah.
those aspects.
Yeah, we're not moving bulk potatoes from Idaho Falls to Denver. We're bringing containers of steel from Brazil subject to tariffs, and once it gets here, we got to put it on 18 different other. It's like you're
Yeah.
you're a link in the chain, which is important. Don't get me wrong, but
It's
I mean,
vital. It doesn't
this
get
is a
done
long
without it.
chain.
Like, yeah. And
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
like, to your point, like, I know we were talking off air about like how many things go involved into some moving just a few horses, right? Like, how many did you say like van load equivalent of stuff sometimes goes with moving one or two horses? And like,
Yeah,
how long
well,
does it take you to organize that?
Well, here's the answer. Well, it depends. It so if we can just take a race, a racing movement. So some of these states require the animal to be on deck for a certain number of days. So horses have to eat, right? So, and these horse owners who have some multi-million-dollar athletes aren't going to go to Tractor Supply and get a bag of feed. So,
Yeah.
we take the feed with us. Also, if you can certify that the feed that arrives is the same feed that left the horse farm, there's less state Department of Agriculture and or Racing Commission bullshit that you have to go through.
Do you weigh that to verify it? Like from point A,
No,
do you
no,
scale it to determine? How do they do that?
They accept printed package information. So if you don't open the bag of feed and you have like the original purchase receipt, or if you've got the POD from where that feed came from, that's helpful. Even if someone else brings it in, whatever, I don't care. But yeah, we're bringing feed. We're bringing, you got to bring your own rake. Like you got to bring, all the halters and tack and everything, all of that shit. The racing saddle's tiny, but you bring like 7 of them with you just in case. There's all that stuff. It's like if you got, Steven, you got 3 kids, is that 3 sons? Yeah, how much shit would you have to bring for a month-long vacation in Italy? It's like, and you're not allowed to eat at a restaurant, right? So, like, you got to bring all your own vegetables. You got to bring your own soap. Like, that's what we're talking about. It's like we're going on deployment with a horse, who,
Yeah.
as far as they know, is just, they get out of the trailer and it was sunny when they left Florida and it's sunny when they arrive in Arkansas. They're just happy as can be, but. There's a lot of stuff that that goes into keeping them happy and healthy.
Yeah. And it's really a point. I just keep thinking, well, mostly probably because like Daytona 500 was just on, right? It's like, oh, you think that race car just went from one place to the next race? How many tires do you think they take just for the practice laps? How many different steering wheels? How many different engines, transmissions? How many different spare parts go? Like, I have no idea what it takes to move a NASCAR from one race to the next, but I got to imagine it's 4 or 5 trailers, and I can't believe that a horse would be much different. To your point, you don't feed a race car, and you don't got to take the fuel with you. Maybe you do. I really don't know, but
I don't think so. Yeah, I think it has to be standardized. Yeah.
A horse eats a lot. Like, you're not stopping at McDonald's to feed the guy. You're not going to Tractor Supply to pick up a bale of hay to just throw it out, while you're commuting from point A to point B.
Yeah. Hey, Secretariat, sorry we ran out of your third cuts alfalfa, but here's some straw from, down the road. So that's not happening.
Wow. Well, this was super interesting. We're definitely going to have you on again, especially when Nate gets back. Anything else you kind of want to share or add before we kind of wrap?
Implementation of transparency, as some organizations are advocating for, will immediately and specifically hurt owner operators, and they should stop.
You want to elaborate?
Nope.
Got the forum.
Yeah, follow me on X. But so if you are demanding transparency, you're adding steps to the process that brokers are not going to want to have to deal with, because if that is implemented, the administrative burden will increase, which will decrease their ability to find and vet viable carriers and to find more customers to fund the administrative bureaucracy that would be foisted upon them. So that means less business for trucks who want to be assholes.
And I'll summarize that, right? If you are going to make a lot of freight brokers create more paperwork and more things to do, they are going to have to hire people, which makes it more expensive to run that business, which means that cost has to go somewhere, right? Like, it's not going to go nowhere or come from nowhere, right? And the more expensive it is to run a business that, and again, whether any trucking companies want to believe this or not, and I see all these memes are like, well, we'll just work with shippers. Great. Well, guess what you then have to do? You're already not making enough money, but now you want to hire salespeople, train them, and run a back office that is twice the size to go establish this. Like, you can, by the way, no one's preventing you, and you can do that right now. And this is not like to disparage trucking companies. Like, margins are thin. The industry's been down for 3 some years, which hasn't happened in the entire existence of the way we've operated. Like, I'm empathetic. I get it. I know that it is difficult. We work with a lot of trucking companies, but at the end of the day, forcing intermediaries to do more work that accomplishes nothing is just going to leave less money for anyone to be able to distribute to you guys working with them, right? It's not going to make anything more efficient.
Yeah, I think it's analogous to, I'm sure you can cook a very nice steak at your house, but sometimes you go to a restaurant and you want someone to do it for you so that you don't have to do all the dishes. Oh, by the way, they're really good at cooking, steak for 700 other people at the same time, which you couldn't possibly do. So it's like, sometimes it's just easier to go sit down at a restaurant because they already got all the shit that you want to eat. Like, I got the freight that you want. You didn't have to call this customer for 3 years. And work on this load for 7 months. But if you look like a good truck, you can read and write English fluently. I'll work with you. I'll run this load with you, and I'll probably pay you a lot more than what DAT says I should.
And oh, by the way, right? A shipper is not going to work with 25 or 100,000 different small trucking companies and coordinate which lanes and which days of the week make sense. They're not going to pay to do that. That is why they outsource to brokers, so that we can get the capacity of the smaller companies. Like, huge companies do not want to be able to negotiate and work with that many companies. It's not efficient. It's too expensive. That is the service that we're able to provide, which allows there to be more work. Again, I think as loads and business picks up and freight changes, I'm sure this will become a distant thought and nobody will be complaining about it again. But it is important to understand where and what happens and where value is provided to both shippers and to carriers. I don't think it is a one-sided argument, but honestly, it was really great having you on. Really looking forward to having you back again when Nate's back from his deployment. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, fellas.
And whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. And if you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.